couple of years ago, my family and I decided to take a much-needed vacation to Mexico. Life had been crazy, work, school, and everything in between. I just wanted to spend a few days relaxing with husband Brian and our two kids, Ethan and Sophie. So, I started looking for an Airbnb somewhere near the beach, and I came across this house near Tulum. It looked perfect. The photos showed this cute little house on a hill, surrounded by jungle, with a pool and a big porch where you could watch the sunset. The reviews were great too. Everyone talked about how peaceful it was, and the host Gabriel seemed super helpful. It was exactly what we needed, so I booked it. We flew into Cancun, rented a white Toyota Highlander, because of course we packed like we were moving to Mexico, and drove a couple of hours south. By the time we got to the house, it was almost sunset, and wow, it was beautiful. The house sat on a hill surrounded by trees, and the view of the jungle stretched out forever. The kids ran straight to the pool, yelling about how cool it was, while Brian and I took a minute to just soak it all in. Gabriel wasn't there to meet us, but he'd left the keys in a lockbox and sent me this long message with tips about the area. He also said to make sure we locked the doors at night because the jungle is alive. I figured he was talking about animals, and honestly, I thought it was kind of cool. You know, an adventure. The inside of the house was super cute. It had colorful tiles, a cozy kitchen, and hammocks on the porch. There was even a welcome basket with fruit and snacks. It felt like a dream. That night we had tacos on the porch while listening to the jungle sounds. It was peaceful, perfect. But looking back, that was the last time I felt completely relaxed. The next morning, I woke up to Sophie standing by my bed. She was whispering, "Mom, there's someone outside." Half asleep, I rubbed my eyes and looked at the clock. 6:15 a.m. Great. I figured she was imagining things, but when I got up and looked out the window, I didn't see anyone. "Are you sure?" I asked her. She nodded, her eyes wide. "I saw someone walking by the pool." I brushed it off. It was early, and maybe she was just half dreaming. But as I made coffee that morning, I couldn't shake this feeling like someone was watching us. It wasn't anything obvious, just a vibe, you know? Later that day, we went to the beach. The kids played in the water. Brian got sunburned because he never listens about sunscreen, and I felt a little better. It was nice to just be a family and forget about the stresses of everyday life. When we got back to the house, though, things felt off. The first thing I noticed was that the kitchen window was closed. I'd left it open before we left because it was so hot, but now it was latched. Brian swore he didn't touch it. Then Sophie started crying because her stuffed bunny, Mr. Snuggles, wasn't in her room anymore. We found it on the dining table, even though she insisted she hadn't brought it there. "Maybe you forgot," I said, trying to calm her down. But deep down, I felt uneasy. I didn't want to admit it, but something wasn't right. That night, I woke up to a noise. It wasn't super loud, just a soft knock. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then it happened again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I froze. It was coming from the window next to our bed. Brian was snoring beside me, and I didn't want to wake him, so I just lay there, holding my breath. After a few minutes, I gathered the courage to peek out the curtain, but I didn't see anything, just the trees swaying in the moonlight. The next morning, I told Brian about it. "It's the jungle," he said. "Probably a branch or something." He was so calm about it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was out there. That afternoon, Ethan came running out of the guest bedroom, yelling, "Mom, Dad, you've got to see this." We followed him in, and he pointed to the closet. Inside, on the back wall, was this small wooden door. None of us had noticed it before. "What's that?" Sophie asked, clinging to my arm. Brian opened it, and inside was this tiny, dark space. It looked like a storage closet, but it smelled awful, like mold and old wood. There was an old chair in there and some crumpled papers on the floor. Ethan, being the curious kid he is, grabbed one of the papers. It was covered in messy writing, but it was in Spanish, so none of us could read it. "Creepy," Brian said, laughing it off. But I didn't think it was funny. I told him we should just leave it alone. By this point, I was ready to go. The house didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt wrong. But Brian convinced me to stay one more night. "We're here," he said. "Let's just enjoy it." That night, after we put the kids to bed, we sat on the porch with a couple of beers, trying to relax. The jungle was loud with the sound of insects and birds, but then everything went quiet. Completely silent. It was eerie. Then, out of nowhere, the power went out. The lights flickered once, and then we were in total darkness. The kids screamed, and I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen. "It's probably a blown fuse," Brian said, but he didn't sound as confident as usual. Then we heard it, a low shuffling sound like someone, or something, was moving outside. It wasn't an animal. It was too deliberate, too slow. The sound got louder, and then we heard footsteps on the porch. Brian told me to stay with the kids while he went to check. He grabbed a kitchen knife and stepped outside. I was terrified, clutching Sophie and Ethan in the bedroom, waiting for him to come back. When he finally did, he looked pale. "There's no one out there," he said. But I found footprints, bare footprints, and they weren't there earlier. We didn't sleep that night. We packed up our things in the dark and waited for the first light of morning. As soon as the sun came up, we loaded the car and left. I didn't leave a review, and I didn't tell Gabriel what happened. I just wanted to forget the whole thing. But even now, back home, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear soft knocks on the window. And every time I do, I wonder, who or what was in that house with us? What would you have done in my shoes? Let me know in the comments. And trust me, the next story is even scarier. So, this all happened last summer, right before my senior year in college. My friends and I decided to plan a little getaway. A weekend trip to relax and escape all the stress of school and internships. It was supposed to be me, my best friend Zoe, her boyfriend Jake, and our other friend Kevin. We wanted something quiet and affordable, so we settled on a cabin in the woods in upstate New York. It looked cozy in the pictures, a small wooden house surrounded by trees, with a fire pit and a little stream nearby. The Airbnb listing seemed normal enough. The host, Sarah, had great reviews, and everyone said the place was peaceful and perfect for a relaxing getaway. Plus, it wasn't expensive, which was ideal for broke college students like us. Sarah described it as a rustic retreat where you can connect with nature. Looking back, I should have known that rustic retreat was code for creepy old cabin. But at the time, we were all excited. The drive to the cabin was long, like 5 hours long, but we made it fun. Jake drove his black Jeep Wrangler, and we had the music blasting the whole way. By the time we got to the cabin, it was late afternoon. The place looked fine from the outside, but not as charming as the photos made it seem. The wood was worn and a little warped, and the porch looked like it hadn't been swept in months. Still, it wasn't terrible. We weren't expecting luxury, and the scenery was beautiful. Trees surrounded the cabin on all sides, and the air smelled fresh and clean. There was even a little path that led down to the stream, which I thought was pretty cool. When we got inside, it was small but cozy. The kitchen was tiny, but it had everything we needed. The living room had an old couch, a small table, and a wood stove. There were 2 bedrooms, one with a queen bed that Zoe and Jake immediately claimed, and another with 2 twin beds for Kevin and me. Sarah, the host, had left us a note on the table. It said, "Welcome. The cabin is old and creaky, but don't let that scare you. It's just the house settling. Enjoy your stay." I didn't think much of it at the time. That first night was actually pretty chill. We made dinner, hung out by the fire pit, and talked about random stuff like upcoming classes and the drama from our last semester. Kevin was making everyone laugh with his terrible ghost stories, and Jake kept teasing him, saying, "Man, you'd be the first one to run if something actually happened." By the time we went to bed, it was close to midnight. I was exhausted, so I fell asleep almost immediately. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to this weird noise. At first, it sounded like tapping, soft and rhythmic, like someone was lightly knocking on the wall. I sat up, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It didn't sound like it was outside. It sounded like it was coming from inside the house. My first thought was that Jake or Kevin was messing with me, but when I looked over, Kevin was still asleep in the twin bed across the room. Then I heard whispering. It was faint, but it was definitely whispering. My heart started racing as I strained to listen, but I couldn't make out what was being said. It almost sounded like it was coming from the hallway. I grabbed my phone and texted Zoe, "Are you guys awake?" I think I hear something. She didn't reply. I eventually convinced myself I was just imagining things and forced myself to go back to sleep. The next morning, I told everyone about the noises, but they all laughed at me. It's an old cabin, Jake said. Of course it's gonna make weird noises. Kevin made a joke about me scaring myself with my imagination, and even Zoe teased me a little. I tried to laugh it off, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. We spent the day hiking on a trail that started right behind the cabin. The woods were gorgeous, huge trees, wildflowers, and the sound of birds chirping everywhere. About an hour into the hike, though, we found something weird. A stack of rocks in the middle of the trail. It wasn't just random. It was carefully arranged, almost like a little tower. "What is that?" I asked. "Probably just some hiker messing around," Kevin said. But even he didn't sound convinced. We found another rock stack a little further down the trail, this one bigger, with a piece of cloth tied around one of the rocks. Zoe joked that it was like something out of the Blair Witch Project, which honestly didn't make me feel any better. That night, things got even weirder. We were all hanging out in the living room, playing cards and drinking wine, when the power suddenly went out. The lights flickered once, and then everything went dark. "Awesome," Jake said sarcastically. "I guess we're roughing it now." Luckily, I had my phone, so I used the flashlight to look for candles. Sarah had mentioned in her note that there were candles under the sink, so I found a few and lit them. The cabin looked even creepier in candlelight. Shadows danced on the walls and every little sound felt amplified. As we sat there waiting for the power to come back, I thought I heard that whispering again. It was faint, but it was there. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" Zoe said, looking at me like I was crazy. "It sounded like whispering," I said. But then we all heard it. A soft, faint voice. It sounded like it was coming from outside the cabin. Jake, being the fearless guy he thinks he is, grabbed his phone and said, "I'm gonna check it out." Zoe begged him not to go, but he just laughed and walked out onto the porch. Kevin and I followed him because, honestly, I didn't want to be left alone inside. The three of us stood there, shining our phone flashlights into the woods. At first, there was nothing, just darkness and the sound of crickets. But then I saw it. A shadow. It was tall and thin, and it moved quickly between the trees. "Did you see that?" I whispered. "Probably just an animal," Jake said, but he didn't sound so sure. We went back inside and locked the door. Zoe was sitting on the couch, looking freaked out. "What happened?" she asked. "Nothing," Jake said. "It's fine." But I could tell he didn't believe that. None of us did. I barely slept that night. Every little sound made me jump, and I kept imagining that shadow outside. Around 3 a.m., I heard something new, a scratching sound. It was faint at first, like claws scraping against wood, but it got louder. It sounded like it was coming from outside my window. I wanted to wake Kevin up, but before I could, the scratching stopped. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps, right outside. I froze, holding my breath, too scared to move. Suddenly, there was a loud bang, like someone had slammed their hand against the wall. Kevin shot up, and I whispered, "Do you hear that?" He nodded, his eyes wide. We woke up Jake and Zoe, and all four of us sat in the living room with the candles, too scared to go back to sleep. As soon as the sun came up, we packed our stuff and got out of there. None of us said much on the drive home, but we all agreed that something wasn't right about that place. When I got back home, I went to check the Airbnb listing, but it was gone. Sarah's profile had been deleted too. Even now, I can't explain what happened at that cabin. All I know is that I'm never staying in a secluded Airbnb again. Some places are better left alone. What would you have done in my situation? Let me know in the comments. And trust me, if you thought this was creepy, wait until you hear the next story. Alright, so here's what happened. I don't usually mess with stuff like Airbnb. I mean, come on, I'm homeless. Most nights, I crash at shelters or find a quiet spot in the city where no one bothers me. But last winter, man, that cold hit different. I couldn't take it anymore. My coat wasn't cutting it, my blanket wasn't cutting it, and I just needed one night, just one, somewhere warm. I'd overheard a couple of guys at the soup kitchen talking about how you could get an Airbnb on the cheap if it was last minute. Something about people lowering the price to fill a spot. I didn't even know if that was true, but I figured it was worth a shot. I scraped together the $40 I had saved, walked to the library, and hopped on one of their computers. And guess what? It worked. I found this place just outside Cleveland, some little guest house in the middle of nowhere. The pictures made it look all right. A small bed, a tiny kitchen, and a heater. That heater part sold me. The host, Karen, had it listed for $30 a night, so I booked it. Why not, right? Getting there was a pain. I had to take 2 buses and then walk a good mile down this busted-up dirt road. By the time I got there, I was freezing. But the guest house? It looked not great. You know when you see something online and it's all glossy and perfect, but then in real life it's like, oof, that's what this was. The roof sagged, the paint was peeling, and the windows looked grimy. But I wasn't about to turn back. It was either this or spend another night in the cold. Karen had said the key would be under the mat, and sure enough, there it was. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and man, the smell hit me. You know that old, stale kind of damp smell? Yeah, it was like that, but mixed with something metallic. Weird, but I figured it was just old pipes or something. Inside, it wasn't much. A bed, a table, a little kitchenette. There was a handwritten note on the counter. It said, "Welcome. The heater works, but it's noisy. Don't mind the creaks, it's just the house settling. Have a great stay." I laughed to myself. Settling? Sure, okay. I kicked off my boots, stretched out on the bed, and figured I'd finally get a decent night's sleep. At first, everything was fine. The heater was loud, just like the note said, but at least it was warm. I fell asleep pretty quick. But around midnight, I woke up to this noise. It was soft at first, like tapping. Not loud, not banging, just a steady tap, tap, tap. I figured it was nothing, maybe a branch hitting the window or something, but then it moved. The tapping went from the wall near the bed to the ceiling, then the floor. It was like it was circling me. I sat up, my heart thumping. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. The tapping stopped after a few minutes, and I convinced myself it was just the house. You know, old wood creaking or whatever. I wrapped the blanket tighter around me and eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd just imagined everything. Maybe I was just on edge because it was a new place, right? I decided to take a walk into town, grab a bite at this diner I'd passed on the way. The day was cold but sunny, and for a minute, I forgot about how creepy the night had been. But walking back, that feeling hit me again. You know the one, like someone's watching you. Every few steps, I'd glance over my shoulder, but no one was there. Just trees and that long dirt road. I picked up the pace and practically ran the last few yards to the guest house. When I got back, the place felt heavier, if that makes sense. Like the air was thick, almost suffocating. I chalked it up to my imagination and decided to just stay put for the rest of the night. That night, things got worse. I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep when the tapping started again. This time, it wasn't just on the walls, it was on the window. I turned my head slowly, and that's when I saw it. A shadow. It was faint, but it was there. It looked like someone standing just outside the window. My heart felt like it was about to explode. I sat up, trying to tell myself it was just a trick of the light, but the second I moved, the shadow disappeared. I grabbed my coat and walked over to the window. Nothing. Just the dark outline of trees and the moonlight spilling through the branches. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, had been there. The next morning, I decided to do some poking around. The place was small, but something about it felt off. That's when I noticed a door in the corner of the kitchen. It wasn't obvious. It was painted the same color as the wall, almost like it was meant to blend in. I stood there for a second, debating whether to open it, but curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed the handle and pulled. Inside was a small, dark space, like a storage room. It smelled damp, and the only thing in there was a chair sitting in the middle of the floor. On the wall behind the chair, there were scratches, words carved into the wood. I squinted to read them. They said, "Get out. She's watching." I slammed the door shut and backed away, my heart pounding. Who was she? And why was she watching? My gut told me to leave right then and there, but I didn't. It was cold outside, and I didn't have anywhere else to go. That night, I left the light on. I figured it might help me feel less scared, but honestly, it didn't do much. The tapping started again around midnight, louder this time. It wasn't just tapping, it was pounding, like someone was trying to break down the walls. I sat there frozen, when suddenly I heard a voice. It was faint at first, like a whisper. A woman's voice saying, "Get out, you're not welcome here." I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The voice grew louder, angrier, repeating the same words over and over. "Get out, get out." Then, I saw her. She was standing in the corner of the room, pale, with long, tangled hair and hollow eyes. Her face was twisted in anger, and she was pointing at the door. I didn't think. I grabbed my boots, didn't even bother putting them on, and bolted out of there. I ran down that dirt road as fast as I could, not stopping until I reached the main road. The next morning, I went back to grab my backpack. I don't know why. I guess I didn't want to lose what little I owned. But when I got there, the guest house was empty. The door was wide open and all the furniture was gone. It looked like no one had lived there in years. To this day, I don't know what I saw or what was in that house. All I know is that I'm never stepping foot in another Airbnb again. Sometimes the streets are safer. What would you have done if you were me? Let me know in the comments. Okay, so let me set the scene. I'm a digital nomad, which basically means I work online and live wherever I feel like. Most of the time, it's amazing. Waking up in a new city, working from a cozy cafe, and meeting new people all the time. But sometimes it's not so great. And this one time in Budapest, it got downright terrifying. I'd been bouncing around Europe for a while and decided to spend a month in Budapest. It's a gorgeous city with a great vibe. Cheap rent, stunning views, and plenty of spots to park my laptop. I was pumped. So I hopped on Airbnb and found this cute little apartment in District Sepid, near the Jewish Quarter. It was advertised as charming and quiet, with high ceilings, vintage furniture, and a balcony overlooking a quiet street. Perfect, right? When I arrived, the building itself was kind of creepy. It was one of those old pre-war buildings with faded paint, rusty balconies, and a dimly lit staircase. But I brushed it off. Old buildings have character, right? Plus, the apartment itself looked nice enough. It had a big window that let in tons of light, a small but functional kitchen, and a bedroom with this huge antique wardrobe. The host, Anna, had left a note on the table. "Enjoy your stay. Please keep the windows shut at night. It's better that way." Weird advice, but whatever. The first night was fine. I unpacked, got some work done, and even walked down to a nearby ruin bar for a drink. The place felt a little eerie when I got back, too quiet, almost, but I chalked it up to jet lag and went to bed. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, but as I sat up, I realized it was coming from inside the apartment. It sounded like shuffling, like someone moving around. My heart started pounding. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, scanning the room. Nothing. I got up and checked the kitchen, the bathroom, even the tiny closet. Still nothing. The apartment was locked, the windows were shut, and I was alone. Okay, I told myself, it's an old building. It's probably just the pipes or something. I went back to bed and tried to forget about it. The next day was normal. I worked at a cafe down the street, explored a bit, and even took some photos from the balcony. By the time I got back, I felt more settled. I ordered some takeout, watched a movie, and actually started to relax. But that night, things got weird again. Around midnight, I was brushing my teeth when I saw it, a shadow in the hallway. It was faint, like someone was standing just out of sight. My stomach dropped. I froze, staring at it in the mirror, but when I turned around, there was no one there. I laughed nervously, trying to shake off the fear. "You're just tired," I muttered to myself. But when I walked into the hallway, I swear, the air felt wrong, heavy, like it was pressing down on me. I locked my bedroom door that night and slept with the lights on. The third day, I decided to check out the antique wardrobe in the bedroom. I'd been avoiding it. It just had this weird energy, you know? But curiosity got the better of me. When I opened it, I found nothing. Just some old hangers and a faint smell of mothballs. But as I was about to close it, I noticed something scratched into the wood on the inside. It said, "Don't look at her." At that point, I was seriously creeped out. I slammed the wardrobe shut and decided to go for a walk. I needed fresh air and some distance from whatever the hell was going on in that apartment. That night, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. The shuffling noises? Probably just the old building. The shadow? Maybe a trick of the light? The message in the wardrobe? A weird prank from a previous tenant. I put on some music, made a cup of tea, and tried to distract myself. But then, around 2 a.m., I woke up again. This time, it wasn't a noise that woke me up. It was a feeling. You know that sensation when someone's watching you? Yeah, it was like that. But way worse. My skin was crawling. I opened my eyes and there she was. A woman, standing in the corner of the room. She was pale, almost gray, with stringy black hair that hung over her face. Her eyes were hollow, and her head tilted slightly to one side, like she was studying me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. She didn't say anything, just stood there, staring. And then, slowly, she raised a hand and pointed at the wardrobe. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen in terror. But eventually I scrambled out of bed, grabbed my phone, and bolted out of the apartment. I didn't even bother putting on shoes. I just ran. I spent the rest of the night at an all-night cafe, sipping coffee and trying to convince myself it wasn't real. Maybe I was dreaming. Maybe it was sleep paralysis. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I went back to grab my stuff. The apartment felt different, emptier, somehow. The air wasn't heavy anymore, and everything was perfectly still. But as I was packing, I noticed something new on the wardrobe. A single word scratched into the wood. Stay. I didn't. I left and booked a cheap hotel for the rest of my time in Budapest. I tried to leave a review on Airbnb, but just like that, the listing was gone. Anna's profile had disappeared too. I still don't know what I saw in that apartment, but I'll never forget the way she looked at me, or the way she pointed to that wardrobe. Now, every time I book an Airbnb, I double-check the reviews and make sure there's nothing strange. But honestly, I don't think I'll ever feel completely safe staying in one again. What would you have done? Let me know in the comments, and do not forget to like and subscribe.